There was a time when kids went to school from 13 years old to 18 years old. They were under their mother's control for the first 12 years of their life, where they learnt things like economics and business and cooking and all kinds of other home-related things, social welfare, all of the values, all of those things that are important in our lives. And then from 13 onwards, they were under the father's control. And that was when they learnt their vocation. Although in some cases, they might have still been under their mother's control because in many cases, mothers ran businesses. And so then they taught those business issues to their children. And you might have someone whose name was David Builder, who was a builder, or David Programmer, who was a programmer, or David Coal Miner, who was a coal miner, and maybe he taught his children those things. Or Mary Seamstress, maybe she taught her children how to be a seamstress. I'm not suggesting we go back to those days. What I'm suggesting is that we understand for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe thousands of years, I don't know, that was the custom until the Industrial Revolution. And then the Industrial Revolution created a 12-year schooling system and a 3 or 4 year or 5 or 6 year or even longer university system to program people to be able to do the work required by the Industrial Revolution. And so we get now to the Bela Bill, the South African bill, which says that in order to fix the education crisis and the employment crisis in South Africa, we have to lengthen the school to 13 years instead of 12 years, start a year earlier. We have to prevent or regulate how children are educated at home. Yet we already know that half the people that matriculate never find work, or maybe never find meaningful work. Even people that get university degrees aren't finding meaningful work in many cases. And this is because the education system in South Africa, and also in many other countries, the standards have been lowered. You know my story, don't you? Why are there grades in school today? It's because there aren't standards anymore. When I went to school, there was standard 1, standard 2, standard 3. You had to meet a certain standard to be progressed to a higher standard. But in school these days, in many cases, children are just promoted. And so you end up with 10-year-olds who can't read and write and spell and can't do basic mathematics because they've just been promoted in the system. And so what happens is you get a matriculant, potentially, in South Africa and other countries who can't do the basics. And so they get tested, and then they've got to go and learn how to get a matric. And so you have a lot of schools which are dedicated to helping people get a real matric. So how do we solve our employment crisis and our education crisis? It seems silly to lengthen the amount of time we spend at school. Rather fix what we already have. Now you've got to have more teachers. You've got to have more rules and more regulations to control what people are learning, but they're not learning. So the learning is messed, generally. I think children should have more time to play, especially when they're young, because when you go to school too early, you get regulated, you get socialized, you get taught to be a cog in an Industrial Revolution machine. But slowly computers are taking over. Robots are taking over. This has been happening since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, with machinery being able to do manual labor, and people being changed to use their brains more than their hands. And so what we need is a generation or generations of children who finish school being highly creative, being able to invent the future, because the old Industrial Revolution won't need them anymore in the way that they've been educated. Lengthening the time people spend in school, in my opinion, is not a correct thing to do. We need to invest in the creativity that you get by spending 12 years or 10 years, I don't know what the right number is, in a playful environment where you learn by playing, you learn by trial and error, you learn by doing things. You learn how to run the family, you learn how to run the family business, you learn about issues that are important in the social network environment. And then you get educated to fit into the things you need. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, I believe that in those first 12 years you should learn to read and write and spell, and you should learn how to speak multiple languages, and you should learn how to do mathematics, and you should learn the fundamentals of things like why is a rugby field a certain size, why is a soccer field a certain size, how to grow food, how to eat organically, how to look after your body, how to be medically fit for your entire life. Things that aren't necessarily taught at school because they get learnt from the parents. And you want to regulate the parents and tell the parents how they must educate their children? When many parents know that they send their children to school and the school isn't educating the children to the values that the parents hold. So I think we need to be really, really careful in what we do, what we regulate, how we increase or lengthen school time, when in fact we need to find a way to invest in children's ability to be intuitive, to know things when they're 6 and 10 years old that they weren't taught. That's what we need right now. We need that intuition. We need that knowledge. We need that embedded knowledge. We see this in many children. For example, a 4-year-old who can already do drumming or who can already run an orchestra. So let's change our education systems so that we can generate people who are highly artistic, highly creative, and who can use that art not just to paint pictures, physical pictures, but to paint pictures of how systems can look, how our minds can be, how our environment can be, how our businesses can be, how we can build bridges in the future, how we can build buildings in the future, what they should look like. How should our transportation look in the future? How should our computers look? How should our education system look? I don't know. All I know is that we need creative people. People who have brains, who know how to use them, not who have brains who've been programmed to think in a particular way. So, if you've watched all this, I appreciate you watching. I'll never ask you to subscribe, like or comment or share. If you feel you want to do that, that's up to you. And thank you for being on my channel. May you be blessed.